Our children must be trained and equipped for war, equipped to face the enemies. And it's ironic to think that our children will learn how to do this task from the enemy within the enemy's territory. But I fear that the main reason why many parents will not take their children out of the secular public schools is actually because of all the work that will need to be done once we assume the God-given responsibility that we have of providing a Christian education for our children. In the last episode of Christ at the Center, I talked about the duty, responsibility, and privilege that God has placed upon us as Christian parents to provide a Christian education for our children. I also mentioned how if we as Christian parents want to see a different and better world, a good first step of action would be to take our kids out of the public secular schools, which biblically are simply pagan schools. Any school that does not connect education to God and fails to relate all subjects to Christ lies by excluding Christ as the origin, foundation, and purpose of each subject, and continues to lie as it claims that these subjects are secular and therefore irrelevant to Christianity. But in reality, there are no subjects that should not be approached from the Christian worldview and religion. Everything belongs to Christ. Now, the topic of last episode, like many other topics, is a topic that obviously produces both positive and negative responses. On the one hand, it's difficult to clarify everything that one wants to communicate, and at the same time, what one does not want to communicate in one relatively short video. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter how clear you are. More than one person will still be against your position, or the Bible's position. But if anything becomes clear to me, at least on a personal level, it is that the negative responses by some tend to demonstrate and confirm that as Christian parents, we don't like accountability, and therefore we like to use exceptions to justify our decisions, aiming at making exceptions normative instead of analyzing each exception in light of what actually is normative, the Word of God, and then making appropriate decisions within the particular situations that we like to call exceptions. In other words, we want to use particulars to undo principles, when in fact we should attend all particulars in light of the principles. Let's think about a particular situation. Margaret, a woman who throughout her 20s became pregnant 3 times by the same man who abandoned her, disappeared, and left her with the daunting task of taking on full responsibility for their 3 children. Margaret recently, through a friend at work, has come to know Christ and is now a member of a healthy church where she feels encouraged and happy. One day, for some reason, within God's providence, Margaret stumbles upon the past episode of Christ at the Center and doesn't know how to respond or what to do. She's confused, perplexed, not because she has a problem accepting the main message of the past episode. That is, that God gives us, the parents, the duty, responsibility, and privilege to provide a Christian education for our children, for God's purpose, which is God's glory. But because of Margaret's particular situation, she does not know how she could even begin to carry out this duty, responsibility, and privilege of educating her children. Because of her confusion, she sends the video to her friend, the one who shared the gospel with her and invited her to church. And this friend, probably out of compassion for Margaret and probably also with the best intentions of helping her new sister in the faith, comments on the video, calling us dogmatic, legalistic, and even arguing against the principles of the video, using the particularities of her friend Margaret's situation to back up such arguing. This approach is the same one used by many people who support abortion. They start with terrible, the most darkest and complicated situations, such as rape, abandonment by the father, extreme poverty, and so on. So that through such particularities, we might be distracted to then ignore the fundamental principles that are in question, like the fact that the baby in the womb is explicitly human life with value and dignity and therefore has the right to life. As Christians, we don't do that, or at least we're not supposed to do that. We start from the principles, and then we move on to make decisions in particular situations seeking to honor the principles. So in other words, no matter what the situation is, the principles rule over the particularities. Now going back to Margaret's story, let's imagine that you and I are part of the congregation which she is now a part of. If we believe that education is truly the responsibility of the parents and that we should seek to fulfill our God-given duty and privileges for His glory and His kingdom, and we also believe that the education of our children must be explicitly Christian education, we would be believing and affirming principles. From there, what do? We move from the principles to analyze the particularities of the situation of our sister. Now, we know that her situation is not ideal, and this, of course, frustrates her because the particularities of her experience are complex, and she is unable to see how she could even begin to make the necessary adjustments to change her situation. All this as she is seeking to honor the principles. If we start there, this analysis, far from leading us to the hopeless conclusion that the core principles don't matter or simply don't exist, should rather lead us to consider all the possible options, but always aware that absolutely all of them will require to some extent sacrifice and work. Let's for a moment consider the particular situation of this sister and agree that indeed she as a mother cannot directly educate her children because her work schedule does not allow her to do so. The goal of providing a Christian education for her children to the glory of God and for His kingdom does not disappear, and she can begin to look for options that seek to honor that same objective. Option number 1, a Christian school. Many times as parents, we don't even look for a Christian school as an option. Rather, we look for something that is close to us, more convenient, something that has a popular or relevant curriculum, sports facilities, extracurricular classes, etc. And we don't even think of a Christian school as a first choice. But let's suppose that this is not our case, and we decide to help the sister, and indeed, we find a Christian school. This option will surely bring in automatic problems, or at least apparent problems. And as we seek to correct the problems that come with this option of moving Margaret's children to this school, one of the problems we might run into is location. But when we say location, we must ask a couple of follow-up questions. Is it a matter of travel time, or is it a matter of expense per travel? Are there ways to address these issues? Well, we could start by asking the obvious questions like, is waking up earlier a possibility? How about moving? Or how about seeing if any family that already has their kids in this school could help with transportation? Does the school itself offer transportation? On the other hand, if the transportation issue is actually more of an issue related to the expense, the moving option could obviously help with that as well. Now, how about us? What if we as brothers in the faith are witnesses of the financial issues of our sister and her non-ideal situation, talk to the deacons of our church, and see if there's any way to contribute or financially support and help our sister who was caught up in this particular situation? Now, of course, if we talk about the general costs of the private Christian school, first we can start by checking if the school provides any kind of help, scholarships, or something to support low-income families. Next, as brothers, wouldn't we be honored and glad to be able to contribute and financially support a sister in this particularly difficult situation so that she can make the necessary changes and adjustments in her pursuit of honoring the principles given by God? Of course, it's definitely easier to ignore all these areas of opportunities to come alongside this sister by simply saying this is a gray area to which the Bible does not truly speak, and therefore we shouldn't be dogmatic about it. You see, it's easy to just sweep things under the rug of legalism. But what's not easy is to actually make the problems of others our own, as we seek to support them in their particular situation. Now, at this point, we've been assuming that there is a Christian school. Let's suppose now that there isn't. Why isn't there? Christian schools don't spring up spontaneously in random cities. They're usually started by churches or by Christian parents who understand the real purpose of education and work hard to develop a place for their own children and the children of others as they seek to honor the biblical principles of education. So why don't we, as brothers and sisters who know and hold to these principles and are witnesses to the particulars of the situation, seek to do something that addresses not only her situation, but the situation of other families as well? There's no Christian school? Let's start it. The world can. Why can't the church? We can start small, just a few families supporting each other. Let's look for men and women who are willing to invest and use their time to provide a Christian education for the children of our church, including Margaret's 3 children. Let's ask for resources from those who may not be able to invest time but want to support financially. Our children are like arrows in the hands of a warrior, whom we must educate in a robust, Christ-centered way so that they are the ones who impact the world. Our children must be trained and equipped for war, equipped to face the enemies. And it's ironic to think that our children will learn how to do this task from the enemy within the enemy's territory. As Dr. Vodi Bakum said, let us not be surprised when we send our children to Caesar and they come back as Romans. At what point were we called to sit on the bench and give our place over to the kingdom of darkness? Did we forget that we, are the salt of the earth, the light of the world, that we, the church, are the ones who should be discipling the nations? What would happen if, as a church, we took responsibility for the current situation we're in and worked towards creating options and solutions geared toward particular situations that flow from the principles God has given us? Maybe these last two episodes would have been completely irrelevant. But I fear that the main reason why many parents will not take their children out of the secular public schools is actually because of all the work that will need to be done once we assume the God-given responsibility that we have of providing a Christian education for our children. Christ at the Center is a Wrath and Grace Studios production. For more content and resources, download the WG Universe app or visit www.wrathandgrace.com.